Okay, students, we are done with abiotic factors. Obviously, we are continuing with the chapter of ecology, relationship of organisms with one another and with the environment. We have gone through the abiotic factors. Today, we will start the biotic factors of an ecosystem. The biotic environment consists of an ecological niche which refers to the function of an organism or the role it plays in an habitat. It's the description of how an organism fits into the environment and what do it do there. If you see the diagram, it looks funny, but it's very important to understand that the organism here is living in a certain environment and it is playing a role there. No two species can have the exact same ecological niche. Every species would have its own role to play in an ecosystem. In an ecosystem, communities are interacting with each other, but they have different roles to play. They can be similar but can never be identical. So for instance, there is a frog living in a swamp and feeding on small insects. Now we will go through the key terms that we use in ecology. There are certain terms that you need to understand before going into the detail of this chapter. First of all, you should be able to understand what an organism is. You have gone through it in your previous classes, that an organism or an species consists of members that are composed of different organs and organ systems, tissue and cells that are working together to do certain specific function. Combination of organism would make up a population. Population would make up a community. Different communities would make up an ecosystem, and ecosystems together make biospheres. Now we will go one by one to these definitions in our next slide. Population is defined as a group of organisms of the same species. So you have to take care of this definition, that population refers to organisms of the same species living in a defined area. It is expressed in terms of density. Density means number of individuals living in a unit area. You define a area and then you tell the number of organisms living in that specified unit area. Then is habitat. It's a place where an organism lives. Community, all the populations of the plants, animals, microorganisms living and interacting in a given habitat would make up a community. Keep in mind that change in population of one member would affect the population of others in the community. A population is never independent. Whenever there will be a change in population of one community, it will directly or indirectly would cause effect on the population of other communities. Ecosystem is a combination of community plus the physical factors, both the chemical and physical factors, abiotic factors that we have read before, would make up an ecosystem. Okay. Let's come to the definition of food chain. Food chain is a series of steps in which organisms transfer energy by eating or being eaten. So we move from one trophic level to other trophic level, converting the energy from one form to another. Here I have given a classic example of a food chain. The first part is grass, which is being fed by the cricket. Cricket is eaten up by a frog, and the frog is eaten by a raccoon. So it is a linear flow of energy from the producer to primary consumer, then to secondary consumer, and then to tertiary consumer. Always remember that the food chain would start from a producer. Producer will start the food chain and it will end at a top consumer or quaternary consumer or a carnivore. Arrows here in the food chain are showing you the direction of how the energy is flowing from one trophic level to another. Now, what is a trophic level? What we are saying trophic level all the time, defining a food chain. What it exactly is? Each link in the food chain is known as trophic level. Trophic levels represent a feeding step in the transfer of energy and matter in an ecosystem. Okay, the next term that we use is food web. Now, food web is a interconnected food chains. There are many food chains in an ecosystem, and when they connect with each other, they make up a food web. And a food web will show all possible feeding relationship in a community at each trophic level. You will understand this concept by looking at this diagram. Now, if you see, there is a web. There are multiple food chains which are connected, but if you see, it is starting from a producer, which is grass. This grass is eaten by mice and raccoon. This mice is also eaten by raccoon. This raccoon is eaten by hawk. This mice is eaten by an hawk. Mice is also eaten up by weasels, and weasels are also eaten by hawk. So hawk is the top carnivore or the top consumer. In between them there are primary and secondary consumers. This is a producer which is producing its own food, and it is flowing, giving the energy to the consumers, whether it may be primary consumer or secondary consumer or tertiary consumer. Okay, now we'll have to see how food chains and food web work. How do they transfer energy from one trophic level to another? Trophic levels, like I told you before, comprises of different steps into which the energy is transferred. So if you see in this diagram, I have made a typical pyramid. This pyramid has producer at the base, which are called autotrophs. I will let you know what autotroph mean, but keep in mind that in a pyramid of energy, this is a pyramid of energy which is telling you that how energy is transferred from this trophic level to this trophic level, to primary consumer, then to secondary, then to tertiary, and it can have quaternary consumer as well. So producer will always be at the base. It will produce its own energy, and then it will transfer energy to the primary consumer, which can be an herbivore. Primary consumer will shift the energy to secondary consumer, which can be a small carnivore. Secondary consumer will transfer the energy to the topmost carnivores. So here if you see that I have written energy is being passed on from producer to primary, secondary and tertiary consumers. Okay, this is a very important topic to understand. Non-cyclic flow of energy. Always remember that the main source of energy on planet Earth is sun, and we are not giving back energy back to the sun. Energy is always moving in a linear manner. It is not flowing in cyclic manner. An ecosystem uses both energy and matter or inorganic nutrients. Energy flows in cyclic manner coming from the sun and flows through the ecosystem. It has to be constantly supplied. There should be a constant source of energy which is coming from the sun. In a balanced ecosystem, materials are never lost and they are continuously recycled. So if you have to understand this, I am putting the slide back to this one. If you see, energy is coming from sun to the producer. This energy would be transferred to the primary consumer, then to secondary and then to tertiary. Now this energy which is gained by the tertiary consumer would never go back to the sun. It may be recycled within the ecosystem but would not be returned to sun. So if you see, the energy is flowing in linear manner. It is not moving in cyclic order. Going back to our slide where we have left. Okay, producers. Producers, very easy to understand. These are the green plants or any organism that can make its own food by using the energy from the sun or inorganic ions. Sunlight is the main energy source for life on earth. We all know this from our primary classes, that sun is the basic source of energy on planet earth. The organism that can make their own food are called autotrophs. Autotrophs, and the nutrition would be called as autotrophic nutrition. What do? They use light or chemical energy to make their own food. Example of these organisms can be plants that we see all around us. Then there are plant-like protists called algae. And then there are certain bacteria which are also able to make their own food. Now you all have gone through the equation of photosynthesis. We know how plants are utilizing this phenomenon to make their own food. They are using carbon dioxide, water, light energy. Don't forget that this process is an enzyme catalyzed process, and you need to have chlorophyll here as well. Plants absorb, traps light energy by the help of chlorophyll and make up carbon dioxide and glucose, which is the main food product. Okay, chemosynthetics or chemosynthesis is a process that you don't have to go through really in your syllabus, but let me tell you that there are certain bacteria which use chemical energy to produce carbohydrates. They do not need light energy to make carbohydrate. They use chemical energy to make carbohydrate. Hence, they are also autotrophs. Okay, this is a very simple diagram to show the process of photosynthesis. This is a plant taking up the sunlight, the light energy, and water and carbon dioxide from the environment. So we see that plants are using carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the root hair cells from the soil, sunlight from the sun, and what it is producing is oxygen that is valuable to us, plus it is making its own food within its cells, which is glucose. Okay, consumers would be those organisms that are directly dependent or indirectly dependent upon producers. They can be primary consumer, they can be tertiary consumers, they can be secondary consumers in the chain, but all these consumers are supposed to get their energy from the producer. These organisms which are unable to make their own food and are dependent upon autotrophs are called heterotrophs. Heterotrophs, again I am repeating, these are the organisms that are unable to produce their own food and are dependent upon ready-made complex food coming from the autotrophs. Feeding interaction, you should be knowing this, that in an ecosystem, energy flows through an ecosystem in one direction. This point is already being discussed. This one direction means that energy is coming from the sun or from inorganic compounds to the autotrophs first. Autotrophs were our plants or bacteria or algae that were able to produce their own food material. These are called producers, and then these producers are transferring the energy to heterotrophs, which are consumers. So consumers have different stages: primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary.